So yeah, I'm. I think it's we are enough people that we can start the discussion. Once again, thank you to all that you took the time to be with us this evening in Romania, a late morning in US, and we are planning to stay what around 1 hour and a half. And as we've had the other discussions before, we are planning to stay 1 hour and a half, out of which, let's say, 10 minutes, 15 minutes about the introduction, getting to know each other. And then we are inviting Judi and you, Larry, to guide us through the work you've been doing up until now. And then let's use some 40 minutes time for discussion, comments, and so on. And of course, we can use also the chat if there are questions that we want to ask, but we don't have now the time because somebody is speaking. So let's use the chat. And we are going to go through each of them. Otherwise, I just want to say, Judi and Larry, that I very much admire the work you are doing and you've been doing, and you are a true inspiration. And I'm glad that you wanted to also be with other special, people in my life, professionally, but also personally. And I mean, all the stories that I've heard during the years from, the beginning of 2000 when we've first met up until now, they are really extraordinary. And the invitation for this dialogue was mainly to look at the idea of development from the perspective of two people that constantly were not happy with what the establishment was doing. And from the fights you, Larry, had in the 80s with basically the whole US and the narrative within US at that moment about the fact that there is no poverty, right, under the Reagan administration, and you've managed to do research, extensive research, documenting the poverty, deep poverty within US until the experience with Peace Corps in Africa. But before that, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the you are first was the second generation of Peace Corps volunteers, right? And then a little bit of the work, pioneering work in Oman that you've done, and then at a certain moment realizing that you want to start your own thing, and working on your own model for development. So I, I I realize that I've asked you, 200 questions, but nevertheless, yeah, the floor is yours. Please guide us to the experience you had with uh, some, as we've named this discussion, challenging the status quo.
I'll start and just say, as by way of introduction, thank you. We call him Mahitsa, as we have since 2003 when we met, and you were our English-speaking tour guide when we came to Romania. And who would have thought that all these years later we would still be in close contact, and you're a close member of our family. But thank you for arranging this. Hear us, because I'm getting some notices from Zoom that our connection is not stable. Do you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you, but the quality of the video, it's a little bit poor, but we can hear you.
That's probably more important. So Larry and I are retired now, sort of, but we've had a lifetime. He is 78 and I'm 60, almost 61. Challenge authority, challenge status quo as far back as we can remember. And I think both of us have this need, this pressing need, to make a better society. And rather than think that that responsibility belongs to someone else, we think that it's our responsibility. And so we've spent our lives in different ways challenging the status quo and trying to improve things. Our discussion today is very timely given what's going on in the US, when there's a whole movement now that stems from police brutality against Blacks, and to see people, thousands upon thousands of people in the streets, in cities and towns in the US and also in different parts of the world, is so amazing and encouraging that you know, that we're leaving as older people the world to some very capable young people who we trust can make a better world. I'll give you a little bit of our backgrounds and not belabor it too long, but Larry has a PhD in social policy from Brandeis University in the US, and he has been a university professor for much of his adult life. He'll tell you more details about that. And my background is in public health. I have a master's in public health and have worked doing different, very broadly defined public health work during my life. Most recently, we started a small family foundation called Chances for Children International, because we believe that education is key to improving society around the world. And so right now we're focusing on two countries, education in two countries, Guatemala and Vietnam. And we try to focus particular attention on education of girls, because we think until there is education for girls and we have more literacy and education, for young women, there won't be equity in the world. And by empowering especially women with education, it will give them an opportunity to improve their lives and the lives of their children. So this is our website, Chances for Children International.
Okay, I'm happy to be able to have this opportunity to speak with you. None of you look like you're teenagers anymore. I assume you're in your 20s and 30s, maybe more, but for an old man who's 78, it's still an opportunity for me to talk with young people who are going to be game changers in this world. I recall when I was in graduate school, the courses that we were required to take, but some of us organized our own course with some very leftist progressive professors. And each week we would meet at the professor's home and have 70 and 80-year-old people come in and tell us what it was like when they were working for social change, the U.S. labor movement or internationally. And it's the class and the course that I remember best, because what I learned from that, of course, is that it isn't extraordinary people who make the changes in the world. It's ordinary people who do extraordinary things. So everybody has the capacity to stand up for justice or to frame issues in ways that they must get addressed. And so it's a matter always of taking existing social conditions and framing them or turning them into problems that must be addressed in society or by the world. This photo here is just one of our students in Vietnam, who we have about 230 young women in Vietnam and Guatemala who we put in school through our foundation. I'm digressing a minute, but I'll just tell you that for about $230 a year, US dollars per year, which is not much money, we can put girls and young women in school. School supposedly is free in most countries, but if parents have to pay for uniforms and books and so on, they can't do that. Or they'll put a boy in school, but they won't put the girl in school. So we primarily put girls in school for $220 a year. And we put our own money into the foundation, but other people contribute, and we give 100%. We take nothing out for ourselves, for travel or for expenses or anything. We just totally, our salary, yeah. We just totally pay for everything so that we can assure people that 100% of what they give will go to put these people in school. These are college age girls in university, yeah. Pardon me, in Guatemala at the time. I've spent a lot of time with young people in my life, and I've been very, very fortunate. You know, I've been a university professor for many, many years. I was the Peace Corps director in Uganda. I was also assistant director of the Peace Corps many years ago under President Jimmy Carter, and and we had a school in Oman for 4 years where we took students from around the world, not just the U.S. but around the world, taught them Middle Eastern culture and taught them Arabic. We had a 12-person Arabic teaching staff. So my point is that my affiliation has always been with young people and the power of young people. And as you think about your lives, each of you, what you're doing now and your career paths and so on, I think that there are 3 ways to look at how people spend their lives, the options that we all have. One is that most people in the world, because of poverty and inequality and so on, cannot spend their lives as social change agents. They just simply have to get by, try to find jobs, try to support their families, deal with the problems of life from health to whatever. And that's probably the majority of people in the world. But for people who come from some means or have the privilege of being educated or whatever, there are 2 life paths. One is just to enjoy life and do things that are pleasurable, travel and see friends and buy things and so on. And the other path is to see yourself as social change agents. That is, people who have a responsibility and the privilege of taking on issues in your country and in the world where you can spend your life trying to make things better. Not always succeeding, but as Sartre said long ago, life is about the challenge. The existence of life and the meaning of life is in the challenge itself, not always in the successes. So I think that for those of you who are doing things like you seem to be doing and are on a career path to try to make a difference in the world and to bring about more opportunity and more justice for the people who are dispossessed in the world, the major thing that I would urge you to think about is how to take existing issues that sort of are just seen as part of normality, part of the body politic, and how to lift those out and transform them into problems that must be addressed. So I'll give you 2 or 3 examples from my own my own life experience, and then we can talk about all of this some more. But one thing that I did early on, even when I was in graduate school, a Black agency in Boston found out that many children, their social workers found out that many children were not attending the public schools. And these were kids who should be in school, both legally and otherwise, but who were not able to attend school. And so the head of this agency, an African-American man who's still alive and my mentor, he's in his late 80s now, hired me, of all people. Well, I didn't even get a salary at first, but hired me to do research to find out what kids were out of school and why they were out of school. So I got some other graduate students and we began to do research on this issue. And what we found was that kids who were out of school, the largest group were Spanish-speaking immigrant children who couldn't go to school because they couldn't speak English, and the schools were providing no education for them in Spanish, or no transitional language education. The second group of out of school were children who were physically different or handicapped. The schools had no ways for them to attend school or sit at desks or so on. And the third group were children who were emotionally and behaviorally different, ranging from children who were actually had psychoses, who were mentally ill, or children who were retarded. And so altogether, we calculated that there were over 10,000 children being excluded from the public schools because the schools were not responsible to their needs. So I wrote a report. It became a book. I was still in graduate school, but it became a book. It was called The Way We Go to School, The Exclusion of Children in Boston. And we had a press conference, and it hit the newspapers, the Boston papers. It was the headlines of the Boston papers. And we were on television and so on. And so within weeks, we began to get money from foundations and started a child advocacy organization called Massachusetts Advocates for Children. It still exists. It just had its 50th anniversary. And they're still representing children. But we also got laws passed. We got a law passed that was the first bilingual education law in the nation, saying that schools have to accept all children, and they have to teach them transitional languages in their own language to get them able to speak English. They have to we got a special education law passed, which became a national law after that, saying that schools are responsible for teaching children who have special needs, like mental illnesses or retardation or whatever. And so this then became the grounds for a national organization called the Children's Defense Fund, which represents children in the U.S. My point of all of this, without going into more detail, is that this is an example of what I say when social change agents take an existing condition that nobody thinks about or cares about or doesn't know how to do it, and transforms that into a problem, a social problem that has to get addressed. Because people in society know about it, the press and media know about it. Mahetza referred to my work when I was at Harvard in the 1980s. We had a president then, Ronald Reagan, who was better than Trump, but not all that much better. And the first thing that he did was to cut the federal budget, our national budget. And he cut programs like programs that feed children in schools, child nutrition programs. And he cut the food stamp program, which gives low-income people stamps by which they can go to the grocery to purchase food. He cut those programs by $12 billion with a B, not an M, a B. $12 billion. He cut those programs. And at that time, soon thereafter, we were seeing photographs in the news media, videos of people going to churches and other facilities to try to get bread and try to get food to eat. And so soup kitchens, what we call soup kitchens, began to develop across the country, where organizations would try to gather food to feed the hungry. So I thought, okay, here I am. I'm a Harvard professor. I got a big institutional name behind me. I don't have any experience in this field, but what are we going to do? So I created a national organization called the Physician Task Force on Hunger in America. I mainly, even though I'm a PhD and not an MD, I wanted mainly it to be physicians, because I wanted to medicalize the issue of hunger and say this is not just a political or social issue, it's a health issue. It's a medical issue affecting the lives of people and the development of children. And so I invited a number of people to be on. The Surgeon General of the United States, a former Surgeon General, very prestigious people who were heads of medical schools, pediatric departments, and so on. And we, over a course of time, 2 years, we went into half of the states of the nation doing field visits. And we would send staff ahead of time to plot out our agenda. And we would have meetings in schools and with children and parents. We would go into their homes and see empty refrigerators. And the media because we were a bunch of doctors and it was Harvard, the media followed us like Pavlov's dogs. I mean, they were everywhere. The national media was with us. And by our work, the nation was seeing how widespread hunger was. And of course, we were saying that it was due to the Reagan budget cuts. And we issued several reports and always getting a lot of media, but we had a national press conference in Washington. And for the first time, we put a number on the number of hungry people in America, saying that 20 million people at that time in 1985 were going hungry in the US. It hit virtually every newspaper in the country, television, interviews over and over with all the major media I had consistently. And ultimately, in the third year, we were able to get all of the $12 billion restored to the federal budget. Ronald Reagan, even we had something called Hands Across America, where people stood hand to hand across the country, and Reagan had to join the line because there was such pressure for him to do something. Again, it's an example of taking an existing social issue and making it into a problem through research and analysis. I'll give you one other example quickly, and that is, we now know that we can predict where famines are going to come about in the world. We don't have to wait until we get into a famine situation. We can predict where there will be famines by looking at different variables in countries or regions of the world. And so at one point in time, I talked a philanthropist into giving me $1 million, and I founded something called the Famine Center at Tufts University. And it still exists. I started it. I did not direct it. I hired the director of Oxfam to come in as the founding director of it. But again, the same example. So those are the kind of things that I urge you to think about, because each of you, from what you've told me, Judi, about your work, you have the opportunity to think about how to transform existing conditions into things that need to be addressed, even in your agency, within your community, so on.
Yeah. We encourage you to take these steps, but there are consequences. There are costs to being an activist, and we both have experienced those challenges. And at the time that I got fired from my first professional job, it tore me apart. I was the founding director of a group called Physician National Health Program. So this was in the mid to late 80s, when talking about national health programs was not on people's radar, and it was seen as really radical. I mean, thankfully, it's talked about now, but we're still not there. But I organized a group of physicians who supported a single-payer health program similar to what's done in Canada. And over the course of about a year, I had recruited about 3,500 doctors nationally in the US, which was huge. These people really cared about providing healthcare access to every American, and we were rationing care based on ability to pay. So there were about 40 million Americans that had no healthcare access. So anyway, it was a heady time. We made presentations at different medical forums, trying to recruit more people. Sent out a monthly newsletter to keep people informed. And the founders of the organization, it was a couple, and they were both physicians and brilliant, but they were also very manipulative and not always honest. And so they and I were locking horns, and ultimately they organized my firing. And it was just, it was devastating at the time. But every time there's a challenge like that, discouraging time, something good grows out of it. And so, you know, that's what we've seen. You know, Larry was fired by the Peace Corps when he was country director of the Peace Corps. We were in Uganda, and after about close to a year, he was working with other African country directors. They had a monthly phone call, a conference call, to just go over things and see how they can work together. And he said it became kind of like commiserating, because people were really unhappy with the way Washington, which was where the Peace Corps national headquarters was, the people in Washington Peace Corps were dictating things that all of these African directors had a problem with. At the time, there was, even though Obama had taken office, he hadn't appointed a new overall director of Peace Corps. So there was a leftover Republican from the previous administration. And when Larry said, you know, I'm the newest person here, even though I'm probably the oldest of these African directors.
They were not, these are country directors, US, they're US people, not Africans.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah. But he said, why don't we come up with a plan to inform the incoming Obama appointed director of Peace Corps of what the top 3, 4, 5 issues are in Africa, so that, you know, we can make some progress. And they agreed and decided that he would be the head of the writing committee to draft this letter. And when his boss and her boss at Peace Corps headquarters got wind of what they were doing, even though it was open, they weren't trying to hide anything.
We told them what we were doing.
Yeah.
That we're going to write a memo to the incoming administration saying, here's things that need to be done in Peace Corps countries.
Right, because they wanted to make Peace Corps better. This was a constructive thing. They weren't trying to tear down the Peace Corps. They wanted to build it, but it was not accepted. They didn't like it, and he was fired on the spot. Somebody came to his office that Washington had sent, and the guy said he was there to take over, and Larry hadn't even been informed that he was fired. This guy didn't, it was just horrible. So, you know, we were devastated. We were so dedicated to being in Uganda and working with Ugandans and the Peace Corps volunteers. And, you know, the volunteers would come to our house and everybody was crying, and they were calling their parents to get in touch with their representatives in Congress to try to get him reinstated, but it was not to happen. And, you know, all of this is to say, with activism can come consequences that you don't intend, don't want, but you have, as our experience, you get through these experiences and build from there, and, you know, you learn from them and you move on, and from every firing, because between the two of us, we've been fired from several jobs. You grow things out of the devastation, and, you know, out of the disappointment, and then become stronger and better equipped the next time around.
I also, as a final example, I also was fired at Tufts University, where I had gone. They gave me tenure and an endowed chair and so on to leave Harvard. And so I did, and I went there, and I was there about 10 years, but they wanted to use my prominence at the time in the country around the issue of hunger to get Congress to give us $5.8 million to set up a center on hunger and poverty. And it was to be a new center, newly built, and so on. And over the course of the 2 or 3 years that this was taking place, I began to realize that the university vice president and attorney were planning to take half of the money that I was raising from Congress and use it for non-related purposes. They wanted to give it to the medical school. And when you get money from, you know, your parliament or from Congress, it's for X or Y or Z. You don't take it and use it for A and B. and they were planning to do this, and I finally saw the blueprints,
yeah.
the plans for the building, and saw what was there for the medical school, infectious disease program, having nothing to do with hunger and poverty. And I was on federal and national grants. I was somebody's the PI, the principal investigator. So it was my name. I was responsible to make sure it was all done legally. So I went to the university vice president and I said, look, you can't do this. This is not legal. And he had about a 20-minute conversation, and he said, we're going to do it. And if you don't want to do it, you'll be fired. And I said, how can you fire me? I have tenure here. I have programs that have a lot of money. And he said, just wait. So I then said, look, I have to go to Washington and tell them I'm not going to have a lie to the government and have this in my name. So I went to the government. The government then took back the money and they fired me. I had the option. I could end up suing them and going through a long process, or instead of doing that, I just went off and went to another university. It just wasn't worth it. But I did make it known, and it was very known. But the point is, look, I'm not suggesting that you guys spend your lives getting fired. It isn't a pleasant thing. But I'm suggesting that your lives and life purpose be so great and so strong that you're not afraid of consequences when you think that the issues are strong enough. And we've always ended up better jobs, better positions, better incomes, so on. So anyway, I think what we might do is stop there now for questions, comments, discussion. But I see that working for opportunity and social justice for the dispossessed of the world, I see it as the rent that we pay for living on this planet. We have responsibilities as people, those of us who are blessed with income, wealth, knowledge, education, certainly, good health. We people who have the capacity have an obligation to make this world better. But I also don't just see it as an obligation. I see it as a great opportunity. I can't imagine the people who just spend their lives having fun, going to play golf, going to movies, not doing anything
and
dreaded.
consuming,
not trying to do things to make the world better. So I don't know if any of this is helpful to you folks on the call, but I'd be happy to, Judi and I would take questions, comments, calls, whatever.
Yeah, thank you so much, Judi and Larry. It's always a delight to hear you, and I know that, I mean, as you've mentioned, it's now when you look back, you know that everything turned well, but at that moment, it's a lot of stress that is involved, uncertainty, and you feel that the ground goes, you don't feel the ground under your feet, and so on. So it's a package. And
Yeah.
I'm sure most of the people in the call, they've experienced these things in there. I mean, Andrea, we had such conversation, and with your disappointment in at a certain moment working within doing community development in an area that well, it should be reached. It is reached, but then it's hard to sometimes do the things that you wanna do or that you've started, right?
Right. I'm actually I'm really happy to get to know you, because I find it very inspiring, and it gives me hope. Because sometimes you really get tired, in being a status quo challenger and a troublemaker in a way, because sometimes you get to be perceived like that. And yeah, I'm curious if you have some extra wisdom of how you think things now after all the experiences with getting fired, getting rejected, and always coming back, like this resilience muscle that you build upon time. yeah, so maybe you will have some extra thoughts on that, like what's the frame of mind you have now, or advices for coming back faster, you know, like recovering sooner somehow. Then I also have some other questions, and you will answer if you have time to all of them or just pick one.
Okay.
You said several times that you had this a call for us, take an existing condition and transform it into a problem. And I'm curious if there is a science behind that. How do you actually do that? How do you take an existing condition and transform it into a problem? I know you said something about research and analysis, but I'm curious if you have some extra input on that, or if there is a methodology behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was quite intrigued with your choice of not taking any operational percent for the amazing things that you do at the Chances for Children. And yeah, I find that intriguing, and I'm wondering, how do you do that? Because for sure you have people having to work for that. So are they all volunteers? And is that a healthy thing, you know, on the long run?
Judi, why don't you respond to that, how we're able to do that, and then I'll address her other
Sure.
questions.
Yeah.
Great questions.
Yeah. We'll take the last question first. So for our foundation, I think because because of what we did in Oman, where we had a school, when we sold that school, we had a chunk of money, and we were you know, comfortable anyway financially, and we decided we're going to put that money, or much of it, into the foundation. And so we use that to both give grants to these organizations and also to fund whatever expenses there are. We don't have a big staff. It's us and our daughter. The three of us are the foundation. So we make it all happen. And we
don't start programs. We don't.
Yeah, I was just going to get to that. We don't start or operate programs in Guatemala and Vietnam ourselves. What we do is we have sought out on the ground there organizations that are small grassroots organizations that work on what we're interested in, education, especially for girls. And we visit them, we spend time with them, we get to know the directors and the staff. And when we're satisfied that they are competent, honest, and do good work, then, you know, we say we'll fund them. But they're more like startup organizations. They're small, and so the grants that we give are not huge, and they wouldn't have the capacity for a huge grant at this point. So they're in the vicinity of $5,000 to $10,000. And that seems to work. And so we're able to operate by funding the travel expenses, whatever small administrative costs, we just fund that out of pocket. And we work out of our home. So we don't have you know, rent to pay for an office or anything like that.
But we totally fell into this. I mean, when we sold the school in Oman, we didn't go to Oman to try to make money. We went there to run the school, but we built the school. There were 70 students in it. We built it till we had over 400 students a year. So when we left after 4 years, I had to come back and have heart surgery. So we left, and an Omani guy wanted to buy the school for all the wrong reasons, it turned out. But so we made $2 million off of it. And we thought, holy smokes, what? We don't need $2 million. What are we're okay already. We have retirement. So we decided, okay, we don't need it. So we put it in the foundation and set it up. And the federal government requires us now to pay 4 to 5% of that each year for these grants. I mean, there are too many people in this world who want to make money, just only want to make money, and then they get a lot of money and they want to make more money, and it's just silly. They can't take it with them. So we decided not to do that. Back to your question about how do you transform? Is there a science to transforming a social condition into a social problem? I think there are two responses to that. One is, I would say that, in the agencies and programs that you run, or that you're part of, if you see things that need to be done, it's best to frame them as positive suggestions to your bosses or other people. Here are some ways that I think that we can make our program better, reach more people, so on. I mean, I despite being fired several times, I usually try the positive way. I usually try things with honey more than vinegar. Here, and so, for example, Judi and I spent 6 weeks this past winter working for a legal services agency representing immigrants on the border of Mexico and the U.S. We went down there thinking we just have to volunteer for 6 weeks as a way to stand up against Trump and what he was doing. Well, this legal services organization was representing people, but they were losing 95% of the cases because of the Trump administration. They would hear these people who had a right to come and ask for asylum in the U.S., but then they would just reject it. 95% of them, they were sent back, many to be killed by drug gangs in their own countries. So we realized that this organization could be doing things very differently. Instead of just going to court to represent people, they should be doing things more of a political nature than a legal nature. And they should be having congressional committees come down there and investigate. They should be dealing with the national press more. They should be filing class action lawsuits representing a whole group of people. And so we wrote up a memo, a 2-page memo, gave it to the executive director and the board, and now then it just changed the way that they're doing business down there. They were so much into their small operation of ways of doing things that they hadn't thought about this. So it's usually better, of course, to try to change things in a positive way, but at least to raise them. Secondly, and I think here's the so-called science behind it. I never thought of it this way, but until you ask it. But it's better not to just do things yourself, but to get other people involved. Like with the Physician Task Force on Hunger in America. Nobody would listen to me as a young professor at Harvard if I was speaking out about hunger. But I got a prestigious national group of people, gave it a name, Physician Task Force on Hunger in America. And we began, then the press found out about us and began to come, whenever we'd go on 2 or 3 day site visits into these cities and towns around the country, 25 states. The press came with us all the time. So I think that it's always better to make it not just about you, but to think how you can use your own position to leverage something that's more powerful than you are to address a problem. Did I answer those two? The first question was more about.
Well, it was quite general, and it was in the inspirational zone. Wisdom, wisdom from the field.
Yeah. It's like, what's the trigger? What motivates you to do this, and what keeps you to, right?
No, it was about the resilience muscle. How do you build that? To get back on your feet faster. Because when it's painful, it might take a while until you come back on the field. And
it was hard when Larry got fired from the Peace Corps in Uganda. I was working there also on a malaria reduction program, and we had to leave the country within a very short time, months, more than a year earlier than we had anticipated. So it just blew our minds. We were absolutely devastated. I just remember, crying every day for months and months and months. And then we had an issue of, we have to get jobs back in the US. And that took a while because, we were not young and usually older people are not as desirable for jobs, depending on what it is.
Yeah, I think I was 66 when I got fired.
Yeah. So, we slogged through a number of months feeling like, oh man, what are we going to do? Just, trying to make opportunities. And And finally, you know, we had an opportunity to go to Oman, which was a place that we had never been, never had an interest in. We didn't know anything about the Middle East, or certainly not Arabic language. And we, you know, Larry was hired to be the director of this, this institution there. And turned out, you know, it totally changed our lives. And if he hadn't been fired from Peace Corps, that would never have happened. I mean, our lives would have taken a much different course. And as it turned out, you know, we had this great experience building up the school, learning so much about a culture that we just had no idea about. And then making the $2 million, which gave us the means to now do, you know, our foundation. So, you know, there's always a positive at the end. I mean, you just have to keep plugging away.
Education, one way to protect yourself is through education. Obviously, people who have university degrees or masters or PhDs have perhaps more capacity to take risks and do things. Another way to protect yourself, as I said, is to get other people involved so that it's not just you, or to set up, you know, create an organization. Just, you know, don't need money to do it. The physician task force, I didn't need money to create it. But you know, create it, and then it becomes something that will be hard for other people to attack and give you some leverage. Other questions or comments?
I have 100, but I will keep them.
Mahita's been here to our farm, and we have a farm in north of Boston in New Hampshire. It's a mountainside farm. It's a small farm, only 8 or 10 acres, but we have goats and chickens and pigs, and so when we are not causing trouble, we pretend that we're farmers.
So if there are any other comments or experience that you have and you want to share, of course, questions to Judi and Larry, this is the time. And until we'll have some other comments or questions, Larry, I wanted to ask you about the experience you had before being country director of Peace Corps in Uganda. The experience being one of the first groups of volunteers, and from what I remember, if I remember correctly, you've been to India. What was changing in between the Peace Corps that you've seen in the beginning, and it was close to, you know, the initial vision, to what became Peace Corps in in the recent years?
Well, first of all, I joined the Peace Corps as a volunteer for 2 years when I was, before I knew Judi, and I was 25 years old. And the reason I thought it was a good idea, it had just been started 2 or 3 years before by President Kennedy. And the idea was to send Americans, mostly young Americans, but even older ones, abroad for 2 years to live in a country and do things like in education and healthcare, business development, so on. And it's the idea is still good, but my real motivation besides that was I was not going to go fight in the Vietnam War. I was totally against the Vietnam War and what the U.S. was doing there, as were many people like me. And at that time, if we refused to go, when the government said you have to join the army, you had 2 options. You would either go to jail or you'd have to move to Canada. And a lot of my friends had those things happen to them. I found a 3rd option, and I joined the Peace Corps. And by the time I came back after 2 years, the war was over. So fortunately, you know, it was lucky for me. But it changed my life, living in India, seeing poverty there, seeing a different culture. I learned the language pretty well. I can still sort of get by in it today, 50 years later. It's like a derivative of Hindi. But I was a very angry young man. I wanted to come back and blow up my country. I was so angry with the way that the U.S. Impacts the rest of the world in negative ways. Some positive, yes, but certainly negative ways. And racism. So it came back to a situation where I was very radicalized. And fortunately, I had applied to go to graduate school to get my PhD. And being in that environment helped settle me down more. But I determined to use my life in a way that would make a difference. I always wanted to struggle. I said I never wanted to work to be vulnerable to somebody else. And so getting a PhD helped. But I also committed to doing something with my life other than just holding a job in an organization and not asking questions or not figuring out how to do things. What happened with Peace Corps, by the way, is that I think probably in your country and in countries of the world, an organization gets started, a new organization, and it's exciting, it's a new idea, and so on. And over time, it becomes bureaucratized. The bureaucracy takes over. Mm-hmm. And so what happened is that when I was a volunteer, my country director in India was my boss, and Washington was not telling him everything to do. Now then, they have country directors, like 28 country directors, Americans who are in different countries in Africa and all over the world. And Washington is always telling them what to do this and do that, and they don't have very much discretion. So that's what's happened. I wrote a book, a revealing book about my getting fired called Peasants Come Last, pointing out that what happens is that Peace Corps Washington cares more about itself than it does the so-called peasants or poor people in the world that we're supposed to be helping. Peace Corps wasn't very happy with it, but it got a lot of national attention and in our Congress too.
Have the microphone.
We do not hear you. Oh,
yes.
Okay.
So I've shared the link for of the book on the event page, and I very much recommend the reading. I mean, it's that kind of text that you once, when you start it, you have to finish it because it flows nicely, and it's very positive, even if it shows the troubled country that Uganda was and it still is, and also the troubled Peace Corps. And yeah, I mean, as you are saying, because as Claudia was saying that she's into human resources and organizational development, this is not only about development organization or if it's an NGO, it's about any structure. It can be a private company, it can be anything. It's government, because governments, they are like institutions that have dozens of years of functioning. So it's also a question: what do we do with these countries? Do we with these structures? We just try to work with them as they are. We try to reform them. How can we do that? What do you think at this moment that it's the compromise or the path to take?
I'd like to hear, let me ask a question of all of you. What's your sense of what is happening in America these days? And I don't just mean with the George Floyd murder by the police, but I mean in general over the past few years. I mean, you know, you had your Ceausescu, we now have our own Ceausescu. I'm wondering what you're thinking about the role of the U.S. in the world, whether it can ever come back to be the good that it was, even with all the bad, or are we irrelevant now?
I would actually be curious in what is actually happening, and I can tell you what I noticed. I see that there are friends on social media that have an opinion about that. I've seen recently long posts on Facebook from friends commenting about what's happening there in America. And I was like, whoa, so there is something going on if these people are having long comments about it. What is going on, actually? Because I'm actually not informed about it. I've seen the comments. It's obvious there is something going on.
Well, I think Trump has managed in his 3 years as president to really magnify a divide in the country, where you've got, you know, people who are very far on the right, who are, you know, racist, they're just more insular. And then other people on the left who are, you know, I think more open-minded. And he's given voice or given legitimacy to the right, and to people who are only there for themselves, basically. And I think because of the times we're in, there was just a confluence of a couple of things that enabled this huge movement that we're now seeing. One was, you know, that Trump just really magnified the differences between people and is allowing this white supremacist attitude, people who support that, to have more of a voice, and social media also makes that possible. Another was the pandemic. So people here are just really frustrated because they've been kind of locked down for a while. There's more than 100,000 deaths in the U.S. And more Black and brown people are dying from COVID because they have less access to health care. They're poorer. They're forced to go to work in certain jobs that are low paying, but they're considered essential, and so they're exposed more to the virus. So there's more deaths. That's seen as, you know, that's unfair. And police brutality against Blacks, especially Black men, has been here in our country, you know, since it began, really. But now it's being recorded. So when there's something that is happening in the streets and the police stop a motorist who's Black just because he's Black, and this is all being recorded and then sent out in social media. So there's all of this going on. And when George Floyd was murdered by this police and 3 others who stood by or assisted him in Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago, it was recorded by a 17-year-old girl. And that was, it made it possible for everyone to see what happened. So in the past, before there were recordings, the police could do all this and nobody would believe the victim. They would believe the police.
The police would say they were resisting arrest.
Yeah.
So blame the victim.
And in the cases where police actually were on trial, they were always acquitted. But now there's more evidence. And so people just had enough and just went out into the streets. And most of the protests were peaceful. Some of them were not. You know, some people took advantage of the situation and looted or you know, broke into buildings. But by and large, around the country, there were peaceful protests. And now the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been going on for about 5 years, has the vast majority of Americans are supporting it, where before it was not so much. You know, white people have joined this movement. The protests that we now see, you know, in the media, on TV, it's everyone, and so now it seems like there's an opportunity to push the agenda forward where there never was before.
Implicit in what Judy's saying is the fact that our nation was born with an original sin, the sin of slavery. America was developed on the backs of Black people. Millions who were brought over here, who died on the way, who were held as slaves. It took a civil war 150 years later to end slavery as a formal way, but it has never ended. We're still fighting the Civil War. That's why the South, where slavery was entrenched, is now very right-wing Republican country. It's still very, very racist, but racism exists everywhere in our country. And so it really is the heart of what America is, the original sin. The other original sin is that we became so capitalist that money became more important than people. And you have big corporations that are abusing workers and doing things internationally just to make more and more and more money for stockholders. I don't mean that we have to have communism, some form of socialism probably I would hope for, but I just mean that the desire to increase capital through capitalism, raw capitalism, is our other original sin. Within that, you know, we've done a lot of good things in the world, but it's also a very bad thing that we're seeing, you know, America, Trump promoting America first in every way, and
pulling out of agreements, international agreements that we've had.
NATO, WHO, you know, he's starting all Paris Treaty, all of these things that happened after World War II, where nations of the world, including countries like yours that had their own revolution, so to speak, and are part of the free world. He's pulling out of those things. Why? I mean, first of all, the man is evil, but secondly, he's very sick. He sees everything through his own ego, and he didn't know how to respond to the pandemic. You know, he never created a national plan like other countries did, and so that's why the U.S. was so hard hit. President Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, who was the one who signed the Emancipation Proclamation for the slaves, once said something. This is, you know, in the 1850s, 60s, but he said something to the effect that you can't fool all the people all the time, but you can fool most of the people much of the time. And that is what happened. Trump came in, people were sick of government and the bickering between the right and the left, and Trump came in and he was going to fix everything. And enough people, even though he lost by 3 million votes, he got in office because of our electoral college system in the States. But he came in as the person who was going to personify reform. And of course, as I say, he's a very sick man. He's not capable. And I think he will be defeated. But the question is, you know, can America ever restore the positive things that it did in the international arena and show that it desires cooperation with other countries of the world?
Yeah, and we should do a whole other discussion, because it's a huge discussion on this subject. Thanks a lot for sharing. I mean, we have a question from Gabriela. Gabriela, do you want me to say it in the chat? So should I read it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you for sharing your inspirational experience. What would be your advice for someone who does not have practical experience in education, but only theoretical, and would like to involve in programs for poor children? Also, your advice for administrative organizational point of view would be very useful. Thank you.
So the issue, the main issue, let me see again, the main issue is for somebody who doesn't have practical experience.
Yeah, I want to get involved. I don't have an experience, but I have the heart for it. What do I do? Where do I start?
Yeah. Well, I would say there's two possibilities for you. One is to, depending on your, if you have a job already, what you could do is volunteer and start working with a local organization or a national organization. The other thing is, of course, you know, if you don't have to get a master's degree in the field, that would give you some leverage. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would definitely suggest having an educational background so that when you apply for jobs, it seems like it's relevant. But really to get experience, volunteering is something I've done over the years quite a bit, and it really puts you into an organization that you're interested in without having to be hired. So even without a lot of experience, you can still obtain the experience by volunteering. So you can probably find organizations for poor children in whatever city or town you're living in, or there may be opportunities on online to do some sort of volunteer work. I don't know how things are shut down because of COVID there, but if there are restrictions on actually going into to work directly with kids, you can do things by social media.
Yeah, we didn't mention it, but we volunteer today. Even we're very involved still with the issue of how immigrants are treated in the U.S. In violation of U.S. law and international law. But Judi and I work very closely with the American Civil Liberties Union in our state and in the Northeast region of the U.S., trying to get people freed who are immigrants who are being held in jails while they're waiting for their immigration hearings. And so we work with lawyers, not just like sort of like the ones we worked with in Texas, but other people. And we found out that the lawyers were arguing cases based on the medical condition of some people that they needed to be released. And so we talked to them and found out that it was really hard for them for the lawyers to go through the medical records of each individual. So we got a group of doctors here in our state. And I told the American Civil Liberties Union, said, we can look at these cases and tell you whether or not they should be eligible for you to argue to the court that they should be released. So even this morning, they sent me some cases, and we have this group of doctors who are involved, and so we're helping the lawyers get people out of the detention centers, the jails. So you can always find ways to insinuate yourself into a situation, even if you don't have a lot of experience and knowledge, and get that simply by being active.
Yeah, and talking about lawyers, I mean, Gabriela, if I'm not mistaken, has a background, is a lawyer by profession. So sometimes you can help by using your own profession. It doesn't mean that you have to do education, but those professions that are working within a specific field, environment, or okay, let's say education or culture, they might need the support of a legal entity or a lawyer or a legal counselor and so on. One thing that I would add here at Gabriela's question is that I would definitely encourage anyone who wants to involve in such ventures to be sure that he's not doing only one-time thing that sure he's doing. I mean, as you, Judi and Larry, were saying, you did not just, I have some money in my pocket and I'll just give it away. You went there and you stayed enough and you talked enough and you've seen enough in order to be sure that the entities that you are going to support are for real there, and that the funds and the time that you are giving away is going to be used for the target group, for that specific audience. So it's sometimes a matter of the consistency of, as we say in EduCab, recurrency. It's a matter of being there and not trying to check boxes, but to find people that are good human beings, and instead of counting the number of projects and things that we are doing, to actually nurture friendships, and that's more important than even counting friendships at the end of a year. So it's a matter of sometimes just doing what you do in the profession, and there is a need for that thing in the other world, let's say, which is complementary.
Gabriela, if you're an attorney, I don't know as much about your culture, obviously, as I do mine, but if you're an attorney, you have a lot of potential power within you to do things. And so if you're trying to be involved with the poor or with education or whatever, uh, my suggestion is that because you are an attorney and have some standing in your country and society, I would go to some institutions, you know, whether they're schools or programs for the poor or whatever, and talk to the directors and say, what is going on here? What is your need? What could, are there ways that I could be helpful to you as a trained attorney, even though I'm not, you know, in this particular field? I think simply by doing that, you're going to come up with ways where you might go back to them and say, okay, we had this discussion, you know, a week ago or a month ago. I would like to help you. It seems to me that one of your needs is X, and I would like to do this for you. So, you know, there are opportunities like that. Everybody has standing, irrespective of degrees. However, I mean, you know, look at what Mahetsa has done. You know, for you to create an international organization, some boy who grew up in rural Romania. I mean, you shouldn't have been able to do that. But in fact, anybody can do things like this. And so it's just a matter of saying, I've got to find ways to make a difference in this world and use the skills and whatever I have, and be a Mahetsa in your own area.
I wanted to also address Gabriella's question. You can also be a mentor to girls and young women. I was thinking about, I don't know if there's similar organizations in Romania, but our daughter works for an organization called Girls Incorporated, and it's a national organization in the US, and they have chapters all around the country. But they do after-school programming for girls to empower them, and it's mainly poor girls. It's very diverse group. It's very different, you know, ethnic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, and so it's from primary school through high school, and they have different programs. One program that we learned about from our daughter is a mentoring program. So she works with teens in high school, and she works on college and career readiness. And you know, for a lot of these girls, they're from immigrant families. They'll be the first to go to university in their families. So it's you know, they're pioneers. It's something new. And so they have a program where there are mentors from the community, women, mainly women, but not necessarily, in different fields who speak to girls, answer their questions. And now they're doing it by Zoom because of COVID, the programs are not meeting in person. But you know, it's really beneficial to these girls to hear from somebody, professionals in different professions, about what their life is like and what is like for someone who's doing it.
And to tell them that they have capacity within them,
Yes.
and help them go to college if they have never thought about college or don't know how to think about it. It's funny, you know, Judi and I are Jewish. We're not religious, but we have a cultural tradition, and in that tradition, it is said that if you save one life, you save the world. I think it's a little bit overstated, but the point is that if you can have an impact on the lives of some young people by stepping in if their parents don't have much wherewithal, or if the particularly girls need help because of sexism in the world or whatever, and you can fill a role for yourself. You know, you don't even need a job. You continue, in your instance, being a lawyer, but this could be, you know, your avocation, the thing that you do and build. So there's just many opportunities, but you usually have to create them for yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, talking about sometimes you just need to help one person if you can. And it's also a question, as we've talked, Judi and Larry, and with some other people that are in the discussion, that is this Romanian philosopher that was asking himself if if we might not be the ones that we should say thank you to the person that we say that we've helped, because he or she gave us the opportunity to help. So, but the thing is that maybe that person, one person that we helped, might be the person that will change something in her or his particular community or in the world. You help the next, I don't know, big film director to get out of some neighborhood or some poor rural community and get to the point where he or she can express his directing potential in there, or a farmer that will become, you know, discovering something out there. But anyway, Gabriela, do you want to comment? Any inputs?
Actually, hi, everyone. Yes, I would like to say that yes, I am in volunteering for a couple of years, and like I would like to make the next step. In this context, I was asking the question. Yeah, the question is, what is the next step? Actually, probably, yeah, I got a lot of answers from you, and probably, yes, I have to reflect a bit about.
Of course, of course.
About this step.
There's always a next step, but you have to constantly be aware of opportunities, and then in your own mind thinking, how could I create something for myself, or how could I convince an organization to do something, you know, something differently. By the way, I see that Andrea has put this that I was mentioning from Abraham Lincoln on the screen.
Actually, she put it the correct one, Larry. I'm sorry to just.
But this was not the reason I actually put it there. It was because it sounded really smart and I looked for it. I googled it. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea. And Luisa, you have a comment, and please do, and welcome. Luisa is joining us from Sofia.
Thank you. Apologies that I've been switching on and off. I think it's been, I've been just changing places from the car over to the apartment. So really lovely. Thank you, Mihai, for inviting me, but also for always having such interesting conversations with people like Larry and Judi. And thank you so much for joining us. I think I've got now so many comments, but I wanted to start by saying that I really appreciated the fact that you keep highlighting the value of education. For someone who's founded an organization of civic education, my heart is my heart is beating with a different race now. So there are a couple of comments that I wanted to make. The one is, so forgive me, I'm a political scientist. So by being a political scientist, I just keep thinking of that how European states basically emerged in a way that was very different from the way the American state was founded. Hence, there is much greater value at the local level and community engagement in the US than there is in Europe. Hence, I mean, because where there is very little state, citizens have to roll up their sleeves and get to do what they need to do.
Yeah.
Because when you were talking about volunteering, and over here in Bulgaria, I work with different communities, different ages. Volunteering is extremely unpopular. And when I listen to you, it's something that's basically so deeply ingrained in your DNA. So that when we talk about these things in our context, we first need to see how do we make this a value for people in the first instance. Because it's not only a matter of, Gabriela being interested in volunteering and engaging, which we surely do. Me, volunteering, Mihai volunteering, probably Andrea and Claudia, Magdalena and Carmen and all of us. But it's really about how do we make this more popular when we live in societies in a context where this is not a value for people, and where this doesn't mean anything to people. So this was the one thing that I wanted to hear your opinion on. The second thing was, you said, Ceausescu, here is Trump. There is a difference, right? I mean, Trump is horrible, but there is a difference, right? You can the U.S. even if it's even if its democracy is being defected, is defective in a way. Its quality is being worsening. Media freedom is different. You can look at different indicators. The U.S. is still a democracy, whereas our region, our countries were something else 30 years ago. So, it helps picture or, get an image, but it's still different. You could still fight back. There are ways for you to fight back in a very legal sort of open way. And then I wanted to also say something to Gabrielle, volunteer. She mentioned 4 children, but what I was going to mention is that there are so many, as you, Lara, were talking at some point, so many legally underserved parts of our societies and parts of communities that I think if you, Gabriel, have something so valuable, like having made your way through all the thick books of legal matters, I would try to support communities that are legally underserved, or try to really see how can we raise the awareness for rule of law in our region, which is the other sort of elephant in the room over here. If you look at the numbers, what is it that people trust the least in the region? These are usually the institutions that are related with justice. So the sense of justice is so much broken over here that I would, if I were you, Gabriela, I would definitely try to volunteer somewhere else, because I think this is so much needed. And wow. This is the end of a very long and very convoluted comment.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, you're right. Trump is not a Ceausescu, because you had a total authoritarian police state. But democracies do not necessarily last forever. The first democracy in Greece, and then it did not last forever. What we're seeing, I think we will last. I think that Trump will be defeated, but it's also very possible that if Trump is defeated in November, when there's a national election, and he's behind now, significantly behind Biden, but there's a very good chance that Trump will act in an authoritarian way and refuse to leave office, refuse to leave the White House. He will say that the election was rigged by the Democrats somehow. And he may call out, each state has what's called the National Guard. It's under the governors of each state. But he can federalize the National Guard. So he may use the National Guard to keep himself in the White House. Our Attorney General Barr, who's right-wing and supports Trump in every way instead of representing the American people like he's supposed to, could easily file criminal charges against Biden about something. So we haven't yet seen the worst of Donald Trump, and it's going to happen. The worst is going to happen from September, October, in that time frame. And so I don't know yet if our democracy will survive. As I say, I think that it will. But if the issue of Trump refuses to leave office, and he goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court does the same thing that it did years ago when it chose Bush over Al Gore, it's not at all sure that we will last. Although you're certainly right, we can fight back, and everybody's fighting back and demonstrating and doing everything possible, and most of us are not going to jail for it.
Or Larry, if you want, I mean, we can look for some land here in Eastern Europe. When you have to move, we can look for some land that you can buy.
Judy and I are pretty actually, yes. Judy and I are pretty resolute that if Trump happened to be reelected again, which we don't think, we will leave the country. It's just too hard. The last 3.5 years has just been too hard to live under this man and these crazy 35 to 40% of the people who, for some reason, keep supporting him. Back to your point, so I was not aware that your country did not necessarily have a tradition of volunteerism, and that it's even looked down upon. Why is it looked down upon?
I think there used to be a tradition back in the days, but I think these, whatever existed on within the civic fabric was basically broken down under years of communism. So you have to imagine 45 years is really a lot of time. And then the way democracies work is that they don't promote democratic values in the same way other ideologies do that. So no one's really been putting any focus on civics. I mean, when you look at that, the subject is going to be introduced in Bulgarian schools only this year for the first time. 30 years post 89, that's been a lot of time that's been wasted, I believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been just, it's gone. When you imagine that every, I don't know, statistics says every probably third or fourth person have been a collaborator of the state security, you can imagine how people have felt about whom you can trust in the room. So low levels of trust. There is a quote that says that trust is the chicken soup of society. So, I mean, these days doesn't work because we're all vegetarians, but we can probably call it the tofu soup. I don't know. No, but you get my point.
I think somebody ought to start a movement in your country to eat meat.
You know, it's interesting. When we lived in Oman, it was similar in that volunteerism was something that just was not done. People really lived for their extended family, and it's a monarchy, and they just also thought the government was there. You know, the king was there to take care of them, the sultan.
Which he did.
Yeah, and he did. But the expats like us that were there would try to organize things from cleaning up a beach or, you know, environmental things, recycling programs. And it was just really, really hard because people just didn't see the point. You know, why would I want to do that? I just have, my world is just small. It's just my family.
Especially in rich countries, these things are very difficult to do. I mean, I've got some insights from places like Qatar, for example. So very difficult because you feel like there are a lot of things you're entitled to by virtue of being part of the closer circles to the royal family.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true in Oman and in the UAE as well. This sense of entitlement. I mean, we would see people throw trash on the street when they're standing right next to a trash basket. Why do they do that? Because they're entitled. They leave the beaches filthy, and they have Southeast Asians workers there who come along and clean it up. Yeah. But I mean, you know, if you have, because you have this history of repression and informants and so on, if it's sort of broken down civil society initiatives in your country, seems to me that's a rich place to begin building it back, you know, in small ways, taking small initiatives, trying to figure out how to put small coalitions together in communities or in cities or whatever, maybe on issues that are not so threatening to politicians or the power structure, but which could help society and help civil society grow.
Yeah. Maybe we can do a next round where we share a little bit more about what and how we're trying to do things, because it'll be also interesting to get your feedback on all of that.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love it. Yeah,
let's do that. Let's do that, because now the conversation that Luisa and also Alexandra, who joined us, and we are having, it's around what we call the civic deserts in various parts of Eastern Europe. And we are talking now about Bulgaria and Romania, southern Romania, which is mainly plain, and people were, you know, they are artificial communities that were formed by Ceausescu, and before Ceausescu, the former Gheorghiu Dej, the other communist leader. And it's like, what do you do in the northern part of Bulgaria, but not only, what do you do in such places? And you have a lot of challenges. Of course, there are a lot of opportunities because of this soil that has so many things that, you know, historical background, and then economic issues, and so on, the social fabric that was altered, and so on. But it's a discussion that let's have it in another group, or maybe people from this group maybe they want to join, because it's under a current project that we are part of, and your input is more than welcome.
If you do that, I would offer and have this kind of discussion as she suggested. I would also offer a person here who's from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and was at Harvard when I was, named John Clippinger, who's working with progressive groups, mainly younger people around the world, regarding the use of technology to develop civil society institutions. So he's written several books, and I think he'd be very happy to join in a conversation like that, and probably be more helpful than we would.
Yeah, let's if you can ask, and let's have maybe next week a conversation.
That'll be great.
Good. Excellent. But talking about what you, Larry, said, that Luisa's comment and question, to try neutral things, and this is Luisa, conversation that we had, right? It's a matter of tackling subjects that are hard to digest by authorities, especially mayors and so on. Is you are coming with your message of human rights, civic rights, civil rights, and so on, and trying to make my community smarter. And if my community is smarter, then they will kick me out of the community. So it's a matter of getting to the subject from the peripheries and to the point, and get to neutral initially with tackling it with the neutral actions, and then you reach to a point, and it might happen that we reach to a point where no one can neglect it anymore because the critical mass is already formed there. But it takes time, of course.
I'd be really excited about having this conversation with you, but as I think more about it, this issue of a lack of a civil society tradition in your country, at least due to the 45-year period that you went through, I think it would be great to try to start some initiatives to reverse that trend and to build it up. Turn a condition.
I think it will be amazing to use a round of really sharing so that we can share with you what is it that exists and what is trying to set foot, because I think, so we can do a very quick map for you so you can imagine also how civil society sector looks like. But there is when you look at a place like Poland, for instance, there are hundreds of thousands of firefighter brigades that are considered to be part of civil society. In this form, sports club, majority of when you look at the statistics, at least. So it's really fascinating. It will be also great to hear back from you when you look at the macro picture, and when we start zooming in, what you think about all of that, and also share with you a little bit about what all of us trying to do.
Yeah, in Bulgaria and Romania both.
Yeah. Specifically on the civic deserts, as we call them, we're trying to work in Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, and Romania.
Okay.
Sort of, we have Bulgaria and Romania, and we have the two troublemakers, Hungary and Poland.
So my connection to Romania stems from my ancestors. The reason that Larry and I and our daughter went to Romania back in 2003, I think it was.
And Poland and Hungary.
And Poland and Hungary was because we're Jewish, and my family came from Iași and from Botoșani, and we wanted to go back there and see, where they came from. My great grandfather came to the U.S. As a teenager in 1906, I believe. And so we went with Maheitza back to our city and visited the cemetery where my great-great-grandparents were buried, and went to the synagogue where they got married in 1877. So it was just a fascinating time.
It's the only synagogue in Iași still standing. 41 of them were demolished, and it happened to be the ones where her great-great-grandparents were married. And we went there on a Monday night. Nobody was expecting us, and they were having a sort of a service. There were 9 men there, and of course, we had a translator with us. And were you with us there?
Yeah, that was
it you? Okay.
Yeah.
So he let them know what we were doing. And well, for the Jews, they need to have something called a minyan, 10 people to have a service.
10 men.
10 men to have a service. Yeah, very sexist. 10 men to have a service. So they pulled me in to be the minyan. Okay, well, I might be Jewish, but I'm a friggin' atheist. So there I was sitting there as they were doing all the praying and this and that, and I didn't know what to say. But it was a real experience to be standing there, and we talked to the guy he's like a janitor, but he's not the rabbi. But we said, well, what did you do here during the war? And he said, I joined the army. And I said, wait a minute, you're on the side of the Germans, a fascist? He says, yeah, that was the way to survive. And he came back, and his family had been totally killed. They were put on one of those train cars, cattle cars filled with people, and they drove them back and forth until they all suffocated. But anyway, so at least we know Romania. We've been around in Poland. It was even more so. So yeah, we could easily, if we get over COVID, we'd come back and love to talk to you guys.
Yeah, and then we could visit Bulgaria because we've not been.
Yeah, you have to also visit Bulgaria. So anyway, I mean, this might be the next visit because I was like asking you for a while, when are you coming back to these places? If things are getting more relaxed with the COVID-19, please consider. I mean, I know that we've passed the time that we've said that we'll allocate for this, but it is so lovely. But again, most of the people that are in the call, and they have and I think all of them, they have great stories, and they have great battles, and they are part of networks of organizations or informal networks of people that are doing good, and it's good that we have the chance to speak and to engage in such conversation, because sometimes we forget about it because we are so connected to our day-to-day operations, and it's a matter of sometimes taking the lateral step, as it is called in psychology, right? And to look at why the hell are we doing what we are doing, and but to look around of other people that are doing this, and then not only look at them, but engage with them. And that's one of my critiques, and some of you already know this, to concepts like TED, because it's putting people on pedestal, as we call it. It's there on the stage, so it's again sacralizing people instead of getting people. And we fought as civilization for hundreds and hundreds of years to get people out of the pedestals, so the royal families, church, everything. We try to bring it in the real world, and now we again sacralize people, putting them in conferences where we just look at them.
But Mihai, you say this only after you gave a TED talk, right?
Exactly. We have to first do it and then to critique. But no, I mean, I'm inspired by so many people that are in there talking. But on the other hand, I realize that it's wrong to if we just do that, right? So for me, these discussions that we have, and especially that they are very intimate, we are not a lot of people, and we keep it like this. We can easily have 100, 200 participants, but that's not a discussion anymore. And most of the people will probably not listen to it. They're just in the call. So that's why I'm so happy that we have people that are really into it. And of course, we'll share the discussion, and some other people that could not join because of schedule and so on, they will be able to do it. One last question that I have to you, Judi and Larry. I mean, we've started with some people that you already know about, and and you know personally, and it's interesting that there are people that started and had started fights in the 80s. What happened there? Like Edgar Kahn, like John McKnight, and so on. what happened there? What do you think that was happening that it's this generation of people that started projects that became national, but some international. And what's the relationship that you had with these people? Did you have a chance to work together with like Edgar Khan and Christine Gray, like John McKnight? And or when, if you didn't have the chance to work with them, but of course you know them, how did you relate to the work that they were doing? Because, and the trigger for my question was from this center that you've started that was called Center for Assets or something like that, right? So
Institute on Asset Policy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, I'm about the same age as they are. I think we're all in our late 70s. So I mean, we knew of one another. We would be at conferences now and then, but we were not fast friends at all, because there were so many people working in different sectors, addressing poverty, inequality, racism, anti-war stuff. You know, in the U.S., there's this very active tradition, as you know. I mean, we are. As sick as we are as a society, sometimes it is very active. We're not a civic desert at all. Sometimes I wish we'd be more so on the right side of the equation, right wing side of the equation. But we're very active, and so we knew each other that way. But you know, I think that it's wrong. It would be wrong to highlight. I think we like I told you when I was a university student, we should learn from the other generation about the battles they fought and how they survived and they created opportunities. But it's wrong to think of any one generation, usually, as different from another. In other words, all generations have to keep fighting. There will never be social justice in this world. It's a continuing process to try to have greater social justice, try to retain the gains that we make, because sometimes they get undermined again in various ways. So I see life as an opportunity and a responsibility, as I said before, for all generations who have the capacity and the means and the knowledge and wherewithal to be fighters and see that this is the rent we pay for living on this planet. Now I'm going to go eat lunch while all of you eat dinner.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us and taking the time. Thank you for everybody that could be with us. And we are going to have the video available probably this evening, if not tomorrow. You know, maybe who wants to share it? It will be on the Periphery Inc. YouTube channel in there. And yeah, I have some more questions, but I will keep it for later. Maybe we can do, as it was the discussion with Luisa, maybe we can do next week, or when it's convenient also for you, that discussion that is applied, you know, specific on civic activism related issues.
It was lovely to talk to you and hear you folks. You know, it's always the reason I've hung around young people all of my life is that it always energizes me. So I believe in you and your capacity. As frustrating as it is to think things through, it's just part of the process, and I'm sure you will do it. Bye-bye.
Ciao. Have a wonderful evening to all.